The first book of Cicero's De Inventione covers the ways in which speeches should be organized, as well as how to identify the various elements and topics within speeches. All cases have a foundational central question, the constitutio, and there are several types of questions that a case might center around. The questions can be conjectural, definitional, evaluative, translative, and legal. The second book details how to make specific arguments on both sides, either of confirmation or refutation. And Cicero notes that, "At present I shall concern myself in explaining controversies with the class of speech delivered in courts of law and the rules applying to them." Cicero acknowledges that there are many types of speeches, but the guidelines of Book 2 will specifically deal with legal speeches. For conjectural issues, Cicero lists several arguments to consider. In a conjectural case, the question is one of fact, such as, did he commit murder? He says that these cases are determined by inference, and that inference is driven by three main considerations: from the cause of the action, from the character of the person involved, and from the nature of the act. Cicero says the cause of the action falls into either impulse or premeditation. An action that falls under impulse is internally driven, from intense emotions or an otherwise agitated mental state, such as intoxication, that can compel someone to act spontaneously. Alternatively, acts of premeditation are planned and deliberate, and are inspired by direct causes, such as friendship, to punish an enemy, or because of fear, glory, or money. For inferences based on the character of the person, Cicero mentions many things that should be considered, such as family, fortune, and overall way of life, especially if they have a history of criminal activity. Finally, for inferences based on the nature of the act, Cicero states that it should be decided if the act is suspicious in and of itself, or if the act is only suspicious when considered with the persons involved. Additionally, he says to consider the actual performance of the act, noting the place, time, occasion, and facilities. While Cicero lists the three considerations of inference in conjectural cases, not all will necessarily be pertinent to every case. Here are the facts of the case. A businessman named Gaius was traveling on the highway to a business meeting, and was carrying with him a considerable amount of money. On the highway, he met a man named Marcus who was traveling the same road. The two men fell into conversation along the road and became friendly, ultimately deciding to stop at the same inn, eating a dinner together and sharing their apartment for the night. In the morning, Marcus wakes up and calls out to Gaius, who is still laying in bed, but there's no response from the other man. He assumes that Gaius must still be really deeply asleep, so he gathers his things and leaves the inn, eager to continue on his journey. A little while later, the innkeeper goes in their room to check on the men. He discovers Gaius in the bed, dead from a stab wound. The innkeeper declares that there was a murder, and alongside some of the other residents at the inn, they pursue Marcus on the road. When the innkeeper and the other men catch up with Marcus on the road, they unsheath his sword to see it crusted over with blood. The men who found Marcus bring him into the city where he is accused of the murder of Gaius, and Marcus pleads not guilty. Next, I'll discuss a potential line of prosecution for this case, following Cicero's advice. Marcus's motive to murder is clear enough. He was in need of money. Even before reaching the point of murder, his own scarcity of money is what caused him to look for a traveling companion in the first place. After all, inns are much cheaper when you're splitting the room fare with someone. Of course, seeing Gaius traveling, he looked like an ideal person to strike up a conversation with, as a businessman would be well off enough to stay at an inn, and he'd be a friendly, social fellow, which is necessary to be successful in business deals. While their relationship might have simply started as a defendant looking for someone to lower his room fare, once they fell into conversation and spent time together on the road, Marcus became aware of precious cargo, the considerable amount of money that Gaius was carrying with him. Gaius kept it close to his person, so as to be less conspicuous, but as they rode close alongside each other, Marcus surely could hear the clinking of coins. Once the defendant was aware of how much money the businessman was carrying, his mind was made up. He held no particular affection for this man. They had just met that day, and it would be simple enough to take him out in the night and make off with the money. Additionally, they had both been traveling alone, so there was no one else in their party to notice that the businessman would be missing. Also, no one else at the inn that night could likely have motive for the murder. Gaius kept his money concealed on his person, and it is unlikely that anyone at the inn would have noticed the clinking of the coins amid the noise and ruckus of dinner time. While there may have been others at the inn that night that needed money, the defendant was the only one who had spent time around Gaius earlier and therefore had some sense of the amount of money he was carrying. Of course, there are many different ways you could go about prosecuting a case like this, but those were just a few examples based on Cicero's advice. Thank you for watching.